My name is Catherine Mercer, though everyone calls me Katie. I was 29 when my brother, looking across our parents' dinner table, said, "You don't belong in our family." He didn't whisper it during an argument or say it in a fit of rage. He announced it while everyone was discussing plans for the luxury family vacation that I had been organizing for 3 months. Then my parents looked at each other, laughed, and said, "Okay." For a few seconds, nobody moved. My mother kept highlighting the reserved restaurant tables in her paperwork. My father closed the travel insurance folder I had put together. My brother raised his glass as if he had just delivered a brilliant joke in a comedy show. My name had already been removed from the family photograph planned at the island resort. My cabin had been given to my brother's girlfriend. And yet, they expected me to stay behind, manage the family business, answer emergency calls, and leave my credit card linked to the charter reservation. That was when I realized the truth. They didn't see me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as unpaid labor with a convenient bank account. I did not cry, argue, or beg them to reconsider. I calmly collected the folder, walked upstairs, packed one suitcase, and left through the side door while they toasted to their real family vacation. They believed I would return before morning and fix everything as usual. Instead, I removed my name from every responsibility they had quietly placed on me. The following day they departed without checking what I had done. By 7:22 that evening, my phone showed 55 missed calls from my brother. They thought rejecting me would make me collapse. They had no idea my absence was about to expose everything holding their family and their business together. For 6 years, I had worked as a marine risk analyst for a commercial insurance cooperative in Astoria, Oregon. My job involved studying accident reports, inspecting vessels, reviewing captain certifications, and identifying the small mistakes that could turn an ordinary trip into $1 million disaster. At work, shipowners listened when I spoke. Insurance attorneys requested my reports. Harbor operators called me before making expensive decisions. At home, my family treated that same expertise as a free service they were entitled to use. My father, Grant Mercer, owned Mercer Harbor Services, a small marina maintenance and charter support company he had inherited from his uncle. My mother, Diane, handled customers and social events. My older brother, Jacob, had been given the title of Business Development Manager, despite having no formal training and a habit of treating every company credit card like a personal reward. Whenever the marina had a compliance problem, I solved it. Whenever an insurance renewal required detailed records, I prepared them. Whenever Jacob promised a client something the company could not legally provide, I found a safe solution before regulators noticed. Yet during family dinners, Jacob called me the paperwork sister and joked that I had built a career around telling real workers what not to do. The trip to the San Juan Islands had originally been my mother's idea for my parents' 30th anniversary. She wanted a private charter yacht, 2 nights at an exclusive island lodge, catered meals, guided kayaking, and professional family photographs. Jacob volunteered to take care of everything, then forwarded every email to me. I compared charter companies, checked safety histories, negotiated a security deposit, verified insurance, and found a vessel that could accommodate my father's back condition. Because the charter company had worked with my employer before, they allowed the reservation to be secured temporarily under my professional credentials and personal credit card. My family promised they would transfer the deposit before departure. They never did. 3 days before the vacation, my mother casually informed me that Jacob's girlfriend would be joining them. When I asked which cabin she would use, my mother stared at the floor. Jacob smiled and said, "Yours. You can stay in the crew quarters if you insist on coming." I thought he was joking until my father added that someone needed to remain available in case the marina had a problem. They wanted me to manage the business remotely while paying part of the vacation expenses and sleeping beside the yacht's equipment lockers. The final humiliation came during the planning dinner. My mother displayed a matching set of navy jackets embroidered with the Mercer family name. There were 5 jackets, 1 for each parent, 1 for Jacob, 1 for his girlfriend, and 1 extra for a family friend. There was none for me. When I asked whether mine had been delayed, Jacob leaned back and said, "Kathy, take the hint. You don't belong in our family." My parents' agreement was not accidental. It was the conclusion of years of smaller betrayals. At 21, I had been told to stand behind the photographer during my grandmother's birthday because Jacob's girlfriend at the time looked better in the picture. At 25, I discovered my parents had changed their estate plan, leaving Jacob the marina and describing the money they had spent on my education as my inheritance, even though I had paid my own tuition through scholarships and night shifts. A year later, My mother circulated a message among relatives suggesting I was emotionally unstable because I had refused to guarantee one of Jacob's business loans. I had screenshots of that message, but I had never confronted her. I kept believing that if I became useful enough, calm enough, and successful enough, they would eventually treat me as family. That night, I finally understood usefulness had become the cage keeping me there. After leaving the house, I drove to a furnished apartment, maintained by my employer for visiting inspectors. I told the property manager I needed it for several days, and placed my suitcase beside the narrow bed. Then I opened my laptop. I did not cancel their entire vacation. I did not sabotage their flights, erase reservations, or attempt to punish them. I simply removed what legally belonged to me. I emailed the charter company and explained that I would not be traveling, would not serve as the trip's emergency risk contact, and did not authorize further charges to my card. I asked them to contact Jacob for replacement payment and documentation. I notified the marina's outside accountant that I was no longer volunteering as an unpaid compliance officer. I revoked Jacob's access to a cloud folder linked to my professional insurance account because he had been using sample documents from my workplace without permission. Finally, I turned off notifications from the family group chat. At 1:14 in the morning, my mother sent one message asking me to make sure the marina payroll cleared Friday. She did not ask where I was. She did not apologize. She still assumed I would perform the invisible work. I responded with a single sentence telling her to contact her accountant. Then I deleted the family photograph that had served as my phone background for 7 years. In it, I was standing at the edge, partly cropped out by my brother's shoulder. Removing it did not feel dramatic. It felt accurate. For the first time, I slept without wondering what new emergency I would be expected to solve before breakfast. But as peaceful as that night felt, I knew one uncomfortable truth from years of analyzing disasters. Systems rarely collapse because of one sudden mistake. They collapse because someone has been quietly preventing dozens of old mistakes from reaching the surface. My family had just sent that person away. The next morning, I woke shortly after 7 and saw that the family group chat had been active since dawn. My mother posted photographs from the drive north showing matching jackets, expensive luggage, and Jacob grinning behind the wheel of my father's SUV. Nobody mentioned me. At 8:36, Jacob wrote, "Best decision ever, keeping the drama at home." My mother reacted with a laughing emoji. I saved the screenshot because my family had a habit of rewriting history once consequences appeared. I spent the morning with my friend Tessa Reed, a local investigative reporter who had known me since community college. She was loyal, but she never agreed with me blindly. She asked whether I had clearly informed the charter company about the payment change. I showed her the email confirming that Jacob had been asked to provide new payment details, and she told me I had done my part and to let them act like adults. Around 10, Jacob messaged me privately telling me that Charter Place said my card wasn't working and to fix it. 7 minutes later he wrote, "Stop being childish. Dad told everyone the yacht was paid for." Then came a voice message accusing me of ruining our parents' anniversary because I was jealous of his girlfriend. I forwarded the confirmation showing that he had been contacted 2 days earlier. He replied with a thumbs down emoji and wrote, "I'll handle it like a man." What happened next came from witness statements, reservation records, Coast Guard reports, and eventually Jacob himself. When my family reached the marina in Anacortes, the charter company refused to release the yacht. The balance had not been paid. The security deposit was no longer authorized, and the designated trip coordinator, me, was not attending. Jacob tried the Mercer Harbor Services corporate card, but it was declined. My father's card triggered a fraud alert because of several unusually large recent charges. Rather than admit the trip was unaffordable, Jacob accused the charter company of treating him unfairly. My father shouted at the dock manager, while my mother recorded the argument for social media. A reasonable family would have gone home, but Jacob found another option. Through an acquaintance, he rented an older 42-foot motor yacht from a private owner. The vessel required an experienced operator, so Jacob uploaded a certificate from the Mercer Harbor Services files. It belonged to a former employee named Daniel Price. Jacob altered the name to his own before submitting it, and promised that the family business would guarantee any damage. My father knew Jacob lacked the proper certification, but pride had already replaced judgment. The family boarded shortly after noon without a professional captain or updated navigation plan. Jacob began drinking before leaving the harbor. At 2:40, my first call arrived. I was walking with Tessa and did not notice it. More messages followed demanding the marina code, asking where the insurance binder was, and claiming this was my fault. I silenced my phone. At approximately 4:15, Jacob entered a narrow passage near an island he had never visited. A depth alarm sounded, but he assumed it was malfunctioning and disconnected it. My father told him to slow down, but Jacob answered, "I know boats better than Kathy ever will." Minutes later, the yacht struck a submerged rock shelf. The impact threw my mother against a cabinet, fractured my father's wrist, and crushed Jacob's left leg between the helm seat and a storage compartment. A fuel line ruptured and the stern began taking on water. Jacob repeatedly tried to restart the engines, making the leak worse. His girlfriend called emergency services. The Coast Guard ordered everyone to put on life jackets and stop touching the controls. That was when my phone began ringing without pause. By 5:30, I had 21 missed calls. By 6:15, I had 38. At 7:22, while Tessa and I sat in her apartment eating takeout, my screen displayed 55 missed calls from Jacob. His final voicemail contained waves, alarms, and his strained breathing, asking me to call back because they were questioning the certificate, and my father said I could explain it. Before I could decide whether to respond, a Coast Guard investigator called. He confirmed that my family had been rescued and asked whether I had authorized Jacob to use a professional marine operator certificate connected to Mercer Harbor Services. I told him no, that he did not have permission, and that the certificate did not belong to him. The investigator asked me to preserve every related record. At that moment, the failed vacation became a financial and criminal crisis. I felt no satisfaction knowing Jacob was injured, but I was not responsible for saving him from a forged document. I returned his call. My mother answered from an emergency room near Friday Harbor. Before I could ask whether everyone was alive, she screamed, "How could you do this to us?" Even after the yacht struck rock, their first instinct was still to blame the daughter they had left behind. I told her I didn't put Jacob behind the wheel, I didn't forge a certificate, and I didn't rent that boat. She began crying, but the tears did not soften her accusation. She said the original yacht would have been released if I had kept my card attached, and that Jacob would never have searched for another vessel if I had not embarrassed him at the marina. My father took the phone and demanded that I call the investigator, claimed the certificate had been uploaded by mistake, and confirmed that Jacob had operated boats under my supervision. I refused, stating it would be a lie and would put my career and license at risk. My father answered, "Careers can be rebuilt. Your brother may lose his leg." The sentence struck me because it summarized my place in the family perfectly. My life was always considered rebuildable. My reputation, savings, time, and future could be sacrificed because Jacob's immediate need was treated as more important. I asked for a medical update. My father said Jacob had multiple fractures, damaged nerves, and possible long-term loss of mobility. My mother had a concussion, my father's wrist was broken, and his girlfriend had cuts but no serious injury. I felt genuine fear for them, followed immediately by anger at myself for still feeling responsible. Tessa sat across the room without interrupting. When the call ended, she reminded me that I could care whether they survive without confessing to something I didn't do. I knew she was right. I also knew an investigator would soon examine Mercer Harbor Services, and I had records showing that Jacob's misuse of documents was not an isolated incident. I packed my laptop, the copied compliance files, and the screenshots I had saved. Tessa offered to drive because my hands were shaking. During the trip north, I replayed every family emergency in which I had been expected to erase Jacob's mistakes. When he damaged a customer's fishing boat at 23, I wrote the incident report that convinced the insurer not to cancel our father's policy. When he used company fuel for private trips, I corrected the accounting records after my father promised it would never happen again. When he told a wealthy client that our marina could certify a vessel for offshore use, I spent 2 weeks finding a licensed engineer before the false promise became fraud. Every rescue had taught Jacob that consequences were temporary, and Kathy would clean them up. Maybe the accident had not happened because I left. Maybe it happened because I had stayed too long. We reached the hospital shortly after midnight. My mother was sitting outside a treatment room with a bandage across her forehead. When she saw me, relief appeared for 1 second before hardening into resentment, and she remarked that I had taken my time. I did not hug her. I asked where my father was. She pointed toward radiology, then began repeating that the accident could have been prevented. I agreed, telling her that Jacob could have accepted that the vacation was no longer affordable, Dad could have refused to board a yacht rented with false documents, and she could have stopped filming the argument and listened to the charter manager. She stared at me as though I had become cruel. I told her I hoped my brother recovered from surgery, but his injuries did not make me responsible for his decisions. A surgeon later explained that Jacob's leg could be saved, but recovery would require multiple procedures. He would probably walk again with extensive rehabilitation, though permanent nerve damage was likely. My mother covered her face. My father arrived with his arm in a cast and immediately asked whether I had brought my laptop. He did not ask whether I was all right. He wanted me to modify old training records so they appeared to support Jacob's claim of experience. I refused. He lowered his voice and reminded me that the marina was my family's livelihood. I replied that it was the livelihood they promised entirely to Jacob, reminding him that they told me my education counted as my inheritance, and they could not call the company mine only when it needed protection. That silenced him briefly. Then he said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "You have always been difficult to love." The words hurt, but they did not control me the way they once had. I opened my laptop and displayed an email Jacob had sent to the yacht owner, claiming to hold Daniel Price's certification, pointing out that this was fraud and difficult to defend. My mother whispered that Jacob must have been confused. I opened the file properties showing the document had been edited 3 hours before departure. Then I showed them company card statements, revealing more than $46,000 in unauthorized personal expenses over 8 months. Resort deposits, sports betting transactions, luxury clothing, and transfers to an investment platform were mixed among legitimate marina purchases. My father's face changed. He claimed he had never seen those statements because Jacob managed the online account. I reminded him that I had warned him repeatedly to separate duties, but he had dismissed me as jealous. I told them the Coast Guard was investigating the grounding, the yacht owner would pursue damages, the insurer might deny coverage because of the forged certification, and the marina's lender might freeze its credit line when they discovered these transactions. My mother asked whether I could make it disappear. I told her no, and that this time I won't try. She accused me of enjoying their suffering. I looked through the glass toward the operating area where my brother lay under surgical lights and told her I didn't enjoy this, but their fear did not erase what they did to me yesterday. They told me I did not belong, and they could not revoke my place in the family at dinner and restore it at midnight because they needed a witness willing to lie. When the investigator arrived, my father attempted to answer every question. I asked to speak separately. I provided factual records, clarified which documents were authentic, and explained my withdrawal from the original charter. I did not exaggerate or seek harsher punishment. I simply stopped protecting them from the truth. For my family, that alone felt like revenge. Jacob remained in surgery until early morning. My parents and I sat in a private waiting area while Tessa brought coffee and quietly worked from a chair near the window. My mother disliked her presence and asked whether she was planning to publish a story. Tessa replied that she was there as my friend, not as a reporter, adding that someone should be. My mother looked away. Around 4, she attempted a softer approach, saying that families sometimes said terrible things under stress. I reminded her that nobody had been under stress when they removed my cabin, excluded me from the photograph, and laughed when Jacob declared that I did not belong. She insisted she had only agreed because she was trying to avoid another argument between us. I told her that avoiding an argument by joining the person humiliating me was a choice. My father remained silent until I opened the screenshots of my mother's old messages describing me as unstable and resentful. One relative had replied, "Kathy has always seemed responsible," to which my mother answered, "That's the image she creates." I placed the phone on the table, pointing out that she had damaged my reputation before asking me to guarantee Jacob's loan because she wanted relatives to distrust me in case I explained why I refused. She began crying again, this time without anger. She admitted that Jacob had told her the marina would fail unless I signed, and she had believed frightening me was the only way to protect the family. I asked her if she ever bothered to ask why the bank required my guarantee, explaining it was because Jacob's numbers did not make sense. My father rubbed his forehead. He revealed that he had known about some of the personal charges, but assumed Jacob would replace the money after receiving a commission from a large client. That client did not exist. Jacob had fabricated projected revenue to persuade the marina's lender to extend credit. The failed vacation was only the visible part of a much larger collapse. By sunrise, the company accountant had left 3 messages saying payroll funds were insufficient. Vendors were demanding overdue payments. A fuel supplier had suspended deliveries. My mother finally understood why Jacob had called me 55 times. He had not only needed help with the accident, he needed access to spreadsheets I had maintained, because those files were the only accurate record of the business's obligations. I agreed to provide copies to the accountant and investigators. I would not return to unpaid work or use my savings to cover payroll. My father accused me of abandoning innocent employees. I told him I would help the accountant identify legitimate wages, but ownership was responsible for funding them, suggesting they sell the vacation property. My parents owned a small coastal condominium they rarely used but refused to sell because it represented status. My mother immediately objected, saying that property was for their retirement. I told her to use it to repair the business they allowed Jacob to drain, adding that they should not ask the daughter they disinherited to finance the son they chose. Shortly after 7, the surgeon entered and told us Jacob was stable. The operation had repaired the fractures and restored blood flow, but nerve damage remained uncertain. He would be unable to work for months. Driving and operating boats would be impossible during recovery. Depending on the investigation, he could also lose eligibility for any future maritime certification. My mother gripped my arm and said he needed us, but I gently removed her hand and told her he needed medical care, legal advice, and accountability, which were not the same as protection from consequences. When Jacob woke, he asked to see my parents first. Through the partly open door, I heard him tell my father to say the forged certificate came from an administrative error. My father whispered that Kathy had already shown investigators the records. Jacob's monitor began sounding faster. He called me a vindictive traitor. A nurse closed the door and asked everyone to remain calm. Half an hour later, he requested to see me alone. His face was pale, and metal supports held his leg in position. For a moment, seeing him injured stripped away my anger. He looked like the boy who used to climb onto the roof of our childhood home and call for me when he became afraid to come down. Then he spoke, telling me to say I trained him. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Are you okay?" His first private sentence was another demand that I sacrifice myself. I sat beside the bed and asked why he had changed Daniel Price's certificate. Jacob claimed he thought operating the yacht would be simple and believed the rental owner was being unnecessarily strict. When I asked about the missing company money, he blamed market losses and said he had planned to repay everything. He had transferred company funds into a speculative trading account, lost most of them, then used more money trying to recover the original loss. The vacation had become a performance designed to convince our parents and his girlfriend that he was still successful. I told him he could have told them the truth. He looked toward the door and said our father respected winners, so he decided I was easier to humiliate. Jacob admitted he had pushed to exclude me because I made him feel exposed. Every time I corrected a safety problem or questioned his numbers, our parents compared his decisions with my career. He wanted one weekend in which I was not present to remind everyone that he had inherited a title he had not earned. I told him I knew he said I wasn't family, and gave away my cabin while leaving my card attached to the reservation. He admitted he thought I'd complain, and then fix it like always. That admission was more honest than any apology. Jacob did not believe I lacked value. He believed my value belonged to him. I told him I would not lie to investigators, that I would provide the financial records and cooperate with the yacht owner's insurer, and would also give him copies so his attorney could understand the evidence. He asked if I was trying to send him to prison, and I replied that I was simply refusing to follow him there. Jacob began to cry, saying that losing the marina would destroy our father. I reminded him that our father had repeatedly ignored warnings, because protecting Jacob mattered more than protecting the business, and that responsibility did not belong to just one person. Before leaving, I set 3 conditions for any future relationship. First, Jacob had to admit the forgery and financial misuse without blaming me. Second, he had to correct every false statement made about my character, including the family messages and the claim that I had sabotaged the vacation. Third, he had to accept that forgiveness would not restore access to my money, labor, professional credentials, or private life. Jacob asked whether completing those conditions would make us close again. I told him no, but it would make a conversation possible. That distinction frightened him because he was accustomed to apologies functioning like reset buttons. For the first time, he understood that some damage could not be undone by saying the correct words in a hospital room. The consequences unfolded over the next 3 months. The yacht suffered severe hull and engine damage. Cleanup crews contained most of the fuel leak, but environmental response costs added tens of thousands of dollars to the claim. Because Jacob had submitted a false certification and operated the vessel after drinking, the insurer denied key protections and pursued both him and Mercer Harbor Services. The Coast Guard imposed civil penalties and referred the altered credential to federal investigators. Jacob avoided prison because he cooperated, had no prior convictions, and accepted a plea related to document fraud. He received probation, community service, restitution obligations, and a temporary prohibition against operating commercial vessels. His driver's license was also suspended because alcohol impairment contributed to the accident. More painful than the legal judgment was the public record. Local maritime businesses learned what he had done, and clients canceled contracts. The marina's largest commercial customer terminated its agreement, saying it could not trust a company managed by someone who falsified safety credentials. Jacob lost his title before he was physically able to return to work. His girlfriend ended their relationship after discovering that he had used a credit card in her name to reserve part of the resort package. My parents called it abandonment during a medical crisis, but Jacob eventually admitted she had spent months asking about unpaid balances he had dismissed as banking errors. His leg required 2 more surgeries. He eventually walked again with a brace, but doctors warned that long periods of standing and operating heavy controls might remain difficult. I did not celebrate his pain. I drove him to one medical appointment when no accessible transportation was available, but I refused to become his permanent caregiver. My mother created a schedule assigning me 3 evenings each week. I returned it with information about professional home care services. She called me cold. I called it a boundary. My parents sold their coastal condominium to cover payroll, taxes, legal fees, and part of the yacht claim. For years, they had said the property would eventually belong to Jacob because he understood the family legacy. Selling it forced them to confront how much they had risked by protecting him. Mercer Harbor Services survived, but my father had to surrender majority control to an outside investor. He remained as an operations supervisor rather than the owner. My mother lost access to company finances. The new investor hired an independent compliance officer and prohibited relatives from using accounts without oversight. The safeguards I had recommended for years became mandatory once my family lost control. During a staff meeting, my father publicly admitted that management failures, not my departure, had caused the crisis. The investor required this statement after employees learned he had blamed me for the frozen accounts. Even so, hearing the truth said aloud mattered. My mother's apology took longer. She first posted a vague message about family surviving misunderstandings. I told her to remove it, stating that forgery, financial manipulation, and deliberate humiliation were not misunderstandings. 2 days later, she posted a direct correction. She admitted that I had organized the original vacation, withdrawn only my own payment authorization after being excluded, and had no role in renting the second yacht. She also contacted relatives to retract the claim that I was unstable. Several family members apologized for believing her. I thanked them, but I did not immediately restore contact. Public correction could repair misinformation. It could not automatically rebuild trust. Jacob resisted apologizing until his attorney explained that accepting responsibility would help his case. I told him I did not want a statement written by a lawyer. Weeks later, he asked to meet after physical therapy. He arrived with a cane and carried a folder containing letters to our parents, former employees, the yacht owner, Daniel Price, his ex-girlfriend, and me. In my letter, he admitted that mocking me before the trip had been deliberate. My competence exposed how little he had earned his position. He wanted me hurt enough to stay home, but guilty enough to remain available. He wrote, "I thought being the favorite meant I was stronger. It really meant nobody made me grow up. I appreciated the honesty, but I did not say everything was forgiven." I asked what he planned to do after probation. He said he had enrolled in bookkeeping and ethics courses, and was considering administrative work with a nonprofit supporting injured dock workers. I told him to do the work even when nobody praises him, because that was the part he never learned. Before leaving, Jacob asked whether I hated him. I told him I hated who I became around them, because I was always proving I deserved space, and I don't live that way anymore. He asked whether we could attend family counseling together. I agreed to one session, provided reconciliation was not treated as the required outcome. During therapy, my parents repeatedly said they wanted the old family back. I told them the old family worked because I absorbed the damage, and that stability built on one person's silence is not healthy. The therapist asked what a healthier family would require. I named 4 things: invitations without obligations, apologies without demands, financial separation, and the right to say no without punishment. Nobody hugged at the end. There was no dramatic reunion. We scheduled another session and left separately. That uncomfortable ending felt honest.